How much damage has been done to the relationship between Washington and this industry because of this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I've always seen just the approach that FTX has brought, and SBF personally, to the conversations in Washington to be a little bit odd. The Chamber of Digital Commerce, we were established in 2014. We were the first organization in the country to advocate for the digital asset and blockchain technology ecosystem. FTX wasn't even established until 5 years later, so they were here much later to the game, and they came out with very aggressive ways to approach policymakers. So there's a lot of goodwill that's been done by our team at the Chamber, by our members at the Chamber who have relationships that supersede the work that SBF has done. I think from a reputational perspective, I think it definitely brings and invigorates the skepticism that we have from regulators and policymakers, but there's an entire industry of people on the ground in Washington educating policymakers about this industry. He is not the face of the industry in Washington, and he never was, and I think that's been misreported.
What are you hearing from your members right now then, Perianne? I'm sure many of them are probably or were FTX clients, or were. Many of them maybe counterparties to Alameda. What are they telling you?
I mean, all of our members who had potentially had exposure to FTX, everybody's putting out statements right now disclosing publicly, if any, exposure to FTX, the FTT token, or any of the contagion around this. Most of our members, we haven't seen any kind of big news from that out of our membership so far. This is really more about the customers. So these are retail investors, and that's where the biggest concern is today. We are concerned about the regulatory overreach. Anytime there's a crisis or something, when something goes bad, a lot of times policymakers, they tend to overreact. We've seen instances similar to this before. There was Mt. Gox in 2013. The Chamber was established during the aftermath of Mt. Gox, and what came out of that? We got the New York BIT license. So we wouldn't want to see a similar reaction because there was one bad actor, one bad event. We want policy making to be done in an informed way, not based on fear. So that is our priority, to ensure that we are fully understanding what's happened here and make sure that any policy responses are done in a way that truly addresses gaps in disclosure regimes and not based out of fear.
To that, I hear it in your answer here. Are you saying that lawmakers are at risk of not really trusting a lot of members of the industry anymore after how much money has been lost in this FTX.com issue? Do you think that some of these changes will face a setback for a while?
I mean, has trust been lost? I mean, at the end of the day, this is an overseas entity, right, where this has spurred from. And we just heard from SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, who really enforced this point, which is this industry has operated in regulatory uncertainty for a long time. We have been clamoring, the Chamber, our members, the industry has been asking for regulatory clarity for years, and that has forced so much activity overseas, and that's really been to the detriment of American investors, and particularly retail investors. So it's really important that we have a regulatory framework that's not enforcement focused. This isn't totally, I don't want to place all the blame on the policymakers, because we did have an unusual situation here, and even if we had perfect policy, you can't plan or mitigate against a bad actor in all circumstances. But I do believe if we had taken a more thoughtful approach to policymaking in the U.S., we could have mitigated the response this week.
Okay, so let's talk about policymaking then, because as all this crypto chaos was going on, it's almost easy to forget that we had midterm elections here in the U.S. on Tuesday. And of course, we still don't ultimately know what the composition of Congress is going to look like. But how optimistic are you that something bipartisan could get done on crypto legislation in the new Congress?
It's very possible. We will likely have a divided Congress, regardless of which party ends up taking control of which chamber. It will be by very slim margins. There is bipartisan support, and actually some policymakers will say this is a nonpartisan issue. There's a difference between bipartisan and nonpartisan. A lot will say crypto is nonpartisan. This is about technology, right? This is no different than the internet, than electricity, than mobile phones, or PCs. So a lot of policymakers understand from the technology perspective, it's important that we have regulatory frameworks that encourage the U.S. to be a leader in this space, and that's going to be important for competitiveness going forward.
Bring us into what actually happened here, because when we saw CZ tweeting over the weekend, he was saying that part of this was because he couldn't really support somebody who was lobbying against him, and we've been hearing a little bit of that FTX, was not necessarily looking out for the industry but themselves. Can you quickly explain here, less than a minute, sorry about that, but what happened?
It does appear that there were some crypto politics at play as well. I mean, you're seeing the same things I'm seeing, but the crypto exchange market has always been very cutthroat and very competitive. Did that play a hand in the unraveling this week? It's very possible.